I'm Margaret Fleming with Front Office Sports, and today we have Jon Patricof, the CEO and co-founder of Athletes Unlimited. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, first thing, big news that came off this summer that I want to ask you about is a major change for Athletes Unlimited. Focus entirely for now on softball and pausing your volleyball and your basketball leagues that had been, successful, lots of big names, and then competing with a lot of other leagues in the market. Tell me a little bit about what went into that decision and how you came to the conclusion to pause those.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we've been operating in Athletes Unlimited since 2020.
Hmm.
We were very early into the space, and always early on, I believed in the importance of scale. I mean, I really believed that it was big, important to go in a big way. Originally, part of the scale was having this network of leagues and operating across sports. And back in 2024, we really identified that the opportunity in women's softball was particularly open space. There was a lot to be done, and we shifted our model from what had been a 5-week season into a full-scale league. We significantly increased our investment in that space of softball. We launched in 2025 with 4 teams in a traveling format. It went better than we ever could have expected. This year we expanded into 6 teams, and I think as we've seen the growth in softball, we've decided to really focus and increase our investment in that space. And the decisions around basketball and volleyball are somewhat independent of those. But I think it's related in the sense that as my role as CEO is to allocate capital, think about where the biggest opportunities are, and make sure we're pursuing them. And so, we have significantly increased our investment in softball, and we're going deep. And we're just coming off now an incredibly successful 2026 season. So, I think in all respects, we couldn't be more excited about where we are in softball. Investors have responded, the marketplace has responded, and ultimately, like, we feel great about where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, so just so from my understanding, to be clear, is the focus to go entirely all in on softball now?
No, I mean, we've announced 2 weeks ago now we paused
Right.
in basketball and volleyball, and I would say we continue to be active in exploring kind of what the next chapter looks like in both of those sports for us. I think you want to be real. We're trying to be very deliberate.
Hmm.
The markets have changed dramatically, as you know, for the better. There's a huge amount of opportunity there, and so nothing's off the table. But I think we are rethinking about if we're going to go and back into those sports and when. It's going to probably look, fairly different than the way it did. And a lot of that's been formed by our success in softball. And so I think we've seen what it takes and how you can succeed at a very high level in a given sport. And again, with softball, the TV audiences we've attracted, the increased marketing partners we've attracted, I think again, we're looking at that, and we're thinking about how we would, succeed in similar and comparable ways in the sport of basketball and volleyball. And we're fortunate in both those sports. We have incredible relationships with our athletes. We had linear distribution. We were succeeding on a lot of metrics. So we were pleased. It's not a question of like, is there an opportunity, or was there anything that was particularly kind of not going the way we wanted it to go? But I think what we've seen is with softball, just dramatic success, and our investment in that space is now substantially larger than it was 2 years ago. And I think I need to focus, and the company needs to focus on making sure we fully seize that opportunity and make the most of it while we can.
Yeah, going off that, and last question on this topic. You had a sizable investment from MLB, 8 figures in AUSL. Was there pressure from them to kind of steer in this direction?
No, I mean, it's been very clear with all of our investors, and since MLB invested, we've been excited to, and really pleased to kind of grow that investor group in AUSL. And we've always been very explicit about kind of the strategy we've had. Listen, the job in front of all of us and as CEO and as a board is to make sure we're fully like capitalizing the opportunity that exists in front of us in softball. I think everybody recognized that the strategy we'd had in place, the fact that we'd operated successfully across multiple sports. So that really was never part of the conversation. It really was something that, at a senior executive level, at my level, it's really a question of, again, allocation of resources.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the season a bit.
Yeah.
Now you're moving on to All-Star Cup and other things now this upcoming weekend back in Rosemont. But the season itself, you expanded into markets after you said touring last year, and that was. I mean, we saw in Portland with the sellouts there, and in Utah with the caw and everything that
Yeah,
they
it's
really
awesome.
had some great responses for fans. How is that like in terms of the growth of the business to be in Marcus
Yeah.
this year?
So we started in softball back in 2020, as I said, and I think the reality is that the sport has an incredible platform, has an incredible fan base. It has been a proven property at the college level, and what it's been lacking really is a robust professional platform with the right resources and the investment. And so we started that process back in 2020. We've increased successively every year. And then obviously with the launch of the AUSL in 2025, it was a massive step up. And then this year again, we stepped up even further. And this year we're in 6 markets, as you mentioned, Portland, which was certainly kind of probably the biggest surprise in many ways. Although we had a guest, Kim Ming, who's our commissioner, was definitely the leader in bringing us to Portland, and she couldn't have been more correct that that market would respond. But we've seen a similar response in Austin, Texas, and we've seen that in Utah, Chicago, Raleigh, Durham, Oklahoma City, of course. So those are the 6 markets we're in, and we've just seen incredible response across the board. And I think that's attributable to, one, there's just a huge demand for softball that's out there. And we're tapping in now and building the platform that fans have been clamoring for. And so I think we've staged our investment very intentionally. And we're going to continue that very intentional growth. And that's kind of, the result. I would say that the biggest kind of metrics that are really stand out there, great crowds, 25 sellouts across the country, merchandise sales up 110%. But really the big thing I think that is in front of everyone's faces is the TV audiences we're attracting. Our championship game attracted over 770,000 viewers. Our ratings are up over 150%. And literally, I think we can go to toe with almost any property that's out there as a TV property, and it's incredible. Audiences, again, it's existed at the college level, and now we're just proving that extends to the pro level, and there's that much demand out there. And this summer was awesome. We just put up another huge number. Over 440,000 people watched a regular season game, just a few weeks ago in our All-Star Cup. So even without the championship, we're attracting, massive audiences that you just don't see every day for any sports property, men's, women's, college, pro, otherwise. These are kind of incredibly strong numbers. And so that's very reassuring for us, and I think drives a lot of where we're going to be going, into 27 and beyond.
Mm-hmm. And Portland in particular has driven some new investment. Tell me more about your
Yeah,
your
so
recent
it's exciting. So last week we announced that Renee James, who is the former president of Intel, a semiconductor and software tech executive, I should say, Renee has just invested and joined our board of directors. And I think it's really telling because you're taking somebody who doesn't have a background in baseball or softball, and now she's coming in a huge way into the AUSL. She's also actually investing more broadly into the baseball and softball space. And I think the AUSL investment, I think, is incredibly indicative of the fact that people are taking notice of this, not just from, people who've been around softball and baseball or been around women's sports. I mean, Renee's coming in, and this is her first move in the space. And, the fact that she has come in the way she has and has already started to kind of contribute in a big way, I think speaks to kind of the fact that this sport is now catching the eyes of people, in women's sports, in the kind of let's call it the core women's sports community, but actually going way beyond that. And, it's now showing up in places that it hasn't shown up historically. And obviously, putting in place a great board, which includes myself and Jonathan, our partners at Major League Baseball, who've been absolutely incredible, and now Renee, it's incredibly important to have the right group of investors around the table and the right people who can offer you strategic advice. And, Renee has built massive businesses at Intel and then also at Ampere Computing, which she sold for multiple billions of dollars to SoftBank. So we're really pleased to have her join.
Yeah. I know earlier this year when you joined FOS for portfolio players, you told my boss, Dan Roberts, that when starting out in 2020, it was always a 10-year plan for the business, thinking ahead that it was never something to try to turn a profit in year one. And now softball being, well into those 10 years. How is, money going? How is revenue going? Is that even a big priority or concern before the Olympics, or is that thinking of the business opportunity after that?
No, I think commercial metrics now are incredibly important. Obviously as I just mentioned, we're looking, we're running this business, we have been running it in a very, I would say, very intentional way that's focused sure on growing the overall kind of market and growing fandom, but ultimately building a really impressive like commercial engine behind that. I think that's essential. I think you certainly now at this stage in the business that has to be a very, very high priority. And so we're deep into in that regard. Again, the metrics that we shared from this season, we've had a tremendous amount of success, but also on the partnership side, we're seeing really great response. We just brought on Sephora last year, and they've come on and it activated in a huge way. And to have a brand like Sephora, again, that's outside of the sports world historically, coming in and activating the way they are. Adidas has just joined us this year in the AUSL, and they've been incredibly active and involved in a way that we haven't seen necessarily in the past from kind of apparel and uniform providers. And so that for us has been awesome. They're an incredible brand on the rise, and they see the huge opportunity around softball. And then, as you mentioned, I think the Olympics being on the horizon now has everyone excited, and it comes up almost in every conversation. And so we're fortunate we've had a great relationship with USA Softball. We've had a great relationship, on the other hand, with Little League. The ecosystem is one that is increasingly growing stronger, and where there's a lot going on, and the Olympics is a absolutely huge moment for us. And so the 27 season, and then of course with 28, and then of course coming out of it, we're highly focused on how do we capitalize and invest in it, and make sure that we make the most of that opportunity.
Yeah. You'd also mentioned to Dan, and then you mentioned earlier that you're a big believer in scale.
Yep.
And so as you're kind of honing in a little bit, I know you're not planning on adding more teams, at least yet, for next season for softball. How are you planning on scaling in softball now that
Yeah.
you're locked in on it?
Absolutely. So, so expansion is absolutely a big topic in our strategy and in our plans. I think we are likely to hold off and do that after the Olympics.
Mhm.
But we are very focused on how do we bring the sport to more fans around the world. It's actually staggering. Over 40% of fans traveled more than 50 miles to come to games this summer. So you've got huge demand, people coming in from around the country to see us. So I think we need to get games into more communities in more places, and make it easier for people to attend. But that also really cuts over to the storytelling and the media presence. I mean, we're really proud of the fact that of the games this summer, 90 games on national television. So making those games accessible, putting them in front of people where they can reach them. ESPN's been our lead partner. They've been incredible. 50 games, most of which were on ESPN or ESPN2, so widely distributed across the ecosystem. That's a huge piece of it, but it's also really the social, the storytelling, the live events. And MLB is a really big part of that for us. They've been incredible. Last year, our players received their year-end awards alongside MLB players at the MLB Awards in November in Vegas. We do a ton around MLB spring training. You should expect us to see players and the AUSL show up, hopefully in the postseason. We were big present at the All-Star game. We're working with them right now on MLBX, which is their kind of version of the home run derby that they've taken now on the road. So we just had players down in Atlanta, and we'll have players in Durham, and there's actually an international event that's happening later this year. So you're going to see AUSL and pro softball players show up in places that you've never seen them before, and really deliver for fans opportunities to engage. We'll have drafts, we'll have college players coming out, and so there's just going to be a huge opportunity, and that's, I think, a big part of the job, right? Which is the season may only run for a few months, but it's really how do we stay present, how do we connect, and a huge part of that is the press. A huge part of that is, of course, our content creation. A huge part of that's the TV coverage, original content that we're creating, and I think that's what it takes to be a successful sports property and sports league.
Yeah, you mentioned players coming out of college. Obviously, this year you had a huge one in NiJaree Canady. Tell me about first, kind of, I guess, chronologically. There was kind of a holdout in those contract negotiations. Tell me about what that was like, and then separately what it was like having her and her star power and her fandom as part of your league.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the biggest kind of pivotal moments for us is how the stars coming out of college, and I think this, by the way, is the case across a lot of now women's sports leagues, basketball. I would say it's very similar, right? That there's a lot of attention and interest from fans coming out of the college level, and we want to capitalize on and leverage that on behalf of the league, but also on behalf of these athletes. And I think what we have to do at AUSL, and what we're highly focused on, is making sure that the players have increasing opportunities on the field, in terms of direct compensation, but also in terms of marketing opportunities and, the equivalent of NIL at the pro level. And that, I'd say, is a very top priority for us. We've dedicated resources internally to that and actually working on behalf of the athletes to make content more accessible to them, to allow their partners to come in and activate or need whatever access they need, assuming we can do it and it works alongside our partners. And so we're highly focused on that. NiJaree's an incredible talent, and she was part of an amazing class that came out this season. And we've just completed this awesome season where they took the field. They now get a little bit of a rest, but I think the big thing for us is those players, it can't end at college, right? Like that is historically what has happened in a lot of women's sports and certainly in softball, which is, there's no way that the peak of your career can be when you're, in your early 20s, having finished college. And so we're highly focused on that. I think we're, in that direction. Every college player that we drafted, signed with us. We're excited that NiJaree joined, had a season playing for the Texas Volts, and we're looking forward to that. But that was a huge indication for us that, all the players that signed, they ended up signing, and they signed it, rookie contracts with us that were awesome, and we've had a great season with them.
Yeah, I want to ask you about a fellow women's diamond sport, the WPBL this year. They've had successes, and also we've seen some struggles with reports of players waiting on payment and things like that. What did you make of their inaugural season and kind of what's come out since?
Listen, I'm always happy when I see other sports properties and other women's sports properties, succeed and achieve things. I think that, I have obviously taken notice of some of the struggles and whatever maybe has been reported the past, week or two. I don't know anything, about it specific firsthand. But what I would say is that, listen, to build a great sports property, you can't measure anything in 1 year. I think I said that to Dan when I was here last, which is, you have the great moment of kind of, before you're going to launch and all the excitement and anticipation, and then you launch and it's exciting to be in your inaugural season. But this is about sustainability. This is about building great platforms. It's about building really solid foundations. And ultimately, it starts with a lot of trust and transparency. And that's been a hallmark of kind of the way we've run the business at Athletes Unlimited. And I think that, one of the things I'm most proud of, I think, is, the relationships we've had with the athletes, the relationships we've had with investors, the relationships we've had with our partners, is that. And I think, that is essential to building a long-term sustainable business. It takes so many different partnerships, constituents. I mean, one of the things about these leagues and these properties is like there's no way to do it on your own, right? You need partners. You need partners at every level, and you fundamentally need great partnership with your athletes. And that again has been a hallmark of what we've done at Athletes Unlimited. That's evolved, that's changed over time, but we've never kind of gone away from that idea. And I'm actually heading to Chicago tomorrow for kind of leadership meetings and our offsite planning for 27. But I'm going to be spending a couple hours with our player executive committee along with Kim, and like they're deep in that process with us. And I think that's a key element of kind of whatever we've achieved to date and where we're going to go going forward is really holding up to that part of that of the equation. And it starts with transparency and being forthcoming with people.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. I know when you're heading to Chicago, you also head up to All-Star Cup in Rosemont. Do you have any predictions on who's gonna take
I
it all
love
home?
it. So for those people who don't know, the Athletes Unlimited softball presence right now is we have the AUSL regular season, which started in June. It ran through July. We had the championship that took place in College Station at Texas A&M. As you mentioned, the Talons won their second championship. And then what we did is we selected 42 of the top players, both the GMs, the fans, everyone jumped in, and 42 of our 90 players were selected to play in a 4-week competition that is called the All-Star Cup. And there's an individual leaderboard. And so actually we crown one individual champion. It's awesome. I mean, last weekend, if people weren't watching, there were Bailey Klingler's at the top of the leaderboard. She's right there with a pitcher, Sam Landry, who's been incredibly popular player in her second year. And we had this incredibly pivotal moment where Sam was facing Bailey, the bottom of the 7th, 2 outs, and Bailey had a home run that won the game and like dramatically shifted the dynamics on the leaderboard. And we could see Sam and her reaction. You could see Bailey and her excitement, her team as well. So it's going to come down to the wire. So I encourage everyone to, I don't know when this will air, but encourage everyone to tune in. And games have been on CBS and have been on ESPN and have been on MLB Network, which is a great partner of ours. And it's an exciting format and people love it. And people want more softball. So that's the ultimate goal here is that, clearly we've leaned very heavily into the traditional format. That is the bulk of what we're doing. And I should say our organization in Athletes Unlimited has never been larger in terms of the number of people who are working with us, the resources we're spending. So we're in heavy investment mode and heavy, mode focused on how do we like fully leverage this opportunity. But the All-Star Cup's a really fun culmination of the season. But huge strength out of the regular season and these teams. And what's been really fun this year is to watch fans follow players in the All-Star Cup because of that team association. So people getting really excited about, a given player, Sam Landry, because they love the Port and Cascade as an example. And so that's a fun piece that we're getting to see this year.
That's a lot of fun. Well, Jon, thank you so much. Enjoy the weekend. Jon Patricof for Front Office Sports. I'm Margaret Fleming. Thank you for watching.